In this series, I'm taking on opponents of different rating levels and showing you how you can win at every level. So we've got a 400 rated opponent today from France and playing this very unusual immediate d4. Now, one reason that this move is rare is because it's not very good. Well, there's a couple of ways that white could play it. One way is with the Smith-Morra gambit, which is where white would follow up after I capture on d4 by playing c3. And the idea of that gambit is to get rapid development. So c3, I take, he takes back with the knight, and white is down a pawn, but white would have, imagine, a knight on c3 and better development. But by taking back with the queen, my opponent is giving me a free developing tempo. So already this is a bit of a mistake. I get the knight out with a threat against the white queen. This is quite a common mistake at this level. So as you're looking to develop in chess, you'll start noticing the types of mistakes that you'll see at every level, and bringing out the queen too early is one of them. You see, my opponent just had to go back, and already I think black is better here because I have a piece developed and white doesn't. White gets to move first in chess, and therefore white should be looking to maintain an opening advantage and even looking to press forward and make that advantage even bigger. But already I think I've equalized here with the black pieces. So I'm just going to keep going with natural development. There's a saying in the opening phase of the game that you should generally develop your knights before the bishops. So I've gone ahead and done that. The reason they say that, by the way, is because you often know where the knights will go before you know where the bishops should go. I think it was one of the older players, maybe someone like Steinitz or Lasker, who said that originally, and it's still good advice today. So I'm just developing my pieces at the moment, just not doing anything fancy. Got to get all of your forces into the action before, well, the tougher parts of the game can be played. You need to get your pieces off their starting squares. That's just good practice. And my opponent's starting to do the same. So after his initial, I think, inaccuracy, bringing the queen out too early, he's developed reasonably well from here. So how do I continue? Well, one of the things that I like to do is try and play different positions in similar ways. Okay, so I do know this Najdorf variation, which is with a pawn on a6. Now, because of the move order that my opponent played, I didn't get to play a6 as quickly as I normally would, but I'm still going to play this move, and the idea of it is to stop a white piece from ending up on b5, maybe a knight, maybe the bishop, but it just lets me to play in a more familiar way. Whenever you're playing the opening or the early middle game, you want to look for positions that you know and that you're familiar with. So by playing a6, although it's kind of a slow pawn move, it brings me back into more familiar territory. It's always a good idea to do that when you can. Now, if you're enjoying the video so far, I'll be continuing this series where I'm playing opponents of different rating levels and yeah, taking on opponents all the way from 100 all the way up to 2000. So if you're enjoying the video, go ahead and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any of the future videos. Now, my opponent has gone ahead and played knight to g5. And there's a rule that says that you shouldn't let your opponent put pieces on good squares or aggressively place squares. So I'm just going to kick this knight away straight away. I don't want to leave that knight on g5 from where it might be able to start creating threats. I mean, imagine if I left the knight there, he might be able to start thinking about bringing his queen in, and then the knight is on a place where it can create havoc. No. Not going to allow that, just get rid of it straight away, h6. It does create a weakness in my pawn structure, but it means that white will have lost time playing the knight up to g5 only to have to move it back again. So let's compare this position where it's white's move with this position where it's my move. It's a subtle difference, but through that sequence, bringing the knight up and then back again, it's changed from being white to move to now being my move. So I'm going to use this to expand on the queen side. This is often an idea that black can use when playing the Sicilian defense. And one thing that you always have to look at whenever you play a move is, does it allow your opponent to win material? And the problem with the move b4 is that it just puts a pawn on a square where it can be taken for free. Now, it's important to do a double check before you go ahead and make the capture. I think a lot of people, when they see free material, their eyes just light up and they don't check twice. But here I can take this, I'm pretty sure. There is some danger in the fact that the knight on b4 will be undefended. So white could consider a sacrifice like this, right? Unveiling an attack against my knight. But in that case, I can counter that by taking a piece of my own. So I'm just going to look at this sequence. Knight takes b4. If he tries to do a tactic against me with knight takes b5, the idea being I take the knight and then he'll take my knight, I can actually respond to that sacrifice by taking on d3. So before taking material, it's important to check whether you're opening yourself up to a tactic. Because what some people can sometimes do is offer a pawn like this, but it cannot be taken for tactical reasons. So you saw that I just did that double check. And this is how strong players think. Whenever they see free material, they're a bit suspicious of it. And they do ask themselves, can I really take that, or is it a trap? And if it's a trap, then of course you don't take the pawn. But in this case, it's not a trap, I'm pretty sure. I mean, unless I'm wrong. But the point is that you do your best to see whether the material can be taken before you take it. Okay, so he hasn't gone for the critical line where I was looking at with taking on b5, but he's just moved the knight out of the way, threatening the knight. Now this is just a one-move threat. I could respond to this in a couple of different ways. I could just move the knight back, for example. I could also support it with a move like d5, which would mean that the knight would be supported by the bishop. That's actually quite tempting, you know, because d5 is also a move that in general I'd like to play. I could also consider taking the bishop here. Taking the bishop is the most simple way to play, but it would improve his pawn structure a bit. So if I take the bishop, he takes back with the pawn, of course, and that pawn, which is currently isolated, would not be isolated anymore. It would actually be moving towards the center. So this move here is the tempting one. I would have to watch out for e5 though in that case, which would open up the bishop's diagonal. But maybe in that case I can take. And then he'd take back this way. Generally you don't want to play d5 if your opponent can respond with e5. This is just about knowing the general middle game ideas. So actually I am going to take this one. It does have the drawback of improving his pawn structure, but I eliminate his light squared bishop, and that light squared bishop can often be a very strong piece for white. So just get rid of that one. And I'm a pawn up, so I've got the bishop pair and I've got an extra pawn. So I like my position. Now if you're around the 400 level and you're looking to improve, it's important to just try and cut these types of moves where you give up a pawn for nothing out of your game. So how can you do that? Well, it's just about being more careful, asking yourself, what will the opponent do if I play the move that I'm about to play? We can call that a blunder check, right? If you play this move up to b4, you need to ask yourself, well, what is my opponent going to do if I play this? And you need to do that before you play the move, obviously. If you play it and then ask the question, then it's too late. I have a feeling that my opponent might have seen it after he played it, but anyway, we get to this position where I've got the extra pawn, and what I want to do from here, pretty simple, just want to improve my pieces. So bishop to b7. This is a great diagonal for the bishop on the long diagonal, creating some threats potentially. So now if the e-pawn was ever advanced, then I could consider taking the knight, which would do some damage to white's pawn structure. But you can just see I haven't really done anything special in this game. I've just played good, solid chess, and I'm a pawn up with the bishop pair. So, you know, the key to winning games at this level, the 400 level, is just not offering any free material and taking the free material when it's offered to you. So what to do from here? Well, further ideas could be rook to c8, looking to take control of the only open file on the board. I think my opponent's best move might be rook to c1, but instead he does this backwards move, which is a bit mysterious. And whenever your opponent plays a move that you don't understand, you should spend some time trying to understand it. I mean, it could be a mistake, but it also could have a strong idea behind it. And it's important to give your opponent respect, no matter what their rating might say. Rating is just a number. So this backwards move, I want to try and understand it, actually. It could be that he wants to bring his bishop to b2 or maybe to a3. That could be his idea. I guess he's just trying to reroute the bishop. Another idea, often when a piece moves away from a square, can be to free that square for another piece to use. Like maybe he's trying to bring his knight in here, although I don't really understand why he'd want to do that. It's probably he wants to play bishop to b2, I would imagine. But I'm not actually concerned about that. So I'm just going to continue with my plan, rook to c8, and see what my opponent has in mind. I think bishop to b2 or bishop to a3 is what we'll see. Now, if you're looking to improve your level in chess, just like to let you know that I help ambitious adults at the below 2000 level improve their results in the game. So if you're looking to, level up in chess and get better, win more games, then let's set up a time to chat. You can do that by clicking the link in the description below. We can see if working together on the Road to 2000 chess improvement program that I offer will be a good fit for you. So then, he does play bishop to b2. That's the move that I expected, and that's the move we've got. Would often like to play queen to c7, but in this particular case, he could respond to that with rook to c1, which would attack the queen. So I want to avoid giving my opponent moves which gain tempo for him. Like queen to c7, rook to c1, white gets the chance to improve his rook with a threat. It's a bit like what we saw earlier in the game, right? In this situation, when he took with the queen, I got to improve the knight with a threat. So in this position, I want to avoid doing the type of mistake that my opponent made earlier by allowing him to improve his rook with a threat. So I'm going to put the queen on b6 instead. This controls some squares in this direction. I'm not worried about this capture. If he captures, then I can always just take. And again, my opponent has unfortunately just left a pawn undefended. This pawn on e4 was formerly defended by the pawn on d3, but after the pawn moves from d3 up to d4, well, that pawn's not defended anymore. Now the question is it better to take with the bishop or with the knight? The knight on e4 looks quite strong, but it's not actually... it looks strong, but it's not actually concretely threatening anything. So you always have to ask, okay, the knight might look pretty on that square, but what is it doing there? Because on e4 it can't actually target anything useful. The bishop, on the other hand, on e4 would be threatening to capture the knight on f3 and therefore cause some pawn structure damage to white. The bishop could also go into c2 with a threat on the white queen. So I'm going to take with the bishop. So now I'm 2 pawns up, and in positions where you are up material, it's often a good idea to look to simplify. Always depends on the exact position that's in front of you, whether you want to simplify or whether you want to keep creating threats. I mean, sometimes when you're up material, the thing to do is actually to not simplify and instead look to finish the game with a checkmating attack. But yeah, the way to play the game safely when you're up material is to trade pieces. So with an extra 2 pawns, I could even go for an endgame and confidently win that. Whereas white now that they're 2 pawns down, they need to think about creating threats. They need to come up with counterplay somehow. But there's not really any counterplay in the position just at the moment. My king is perfectly safe here. All of my pieces are coordinated and active. I've got the bishop pair on an open board, so I've got a lot of advantages here. But if I wanted to simplify the game, then that would also be winning for me. The key when you're up material is to just not let things get out of hand, not let them get complicated. So he's gone ahead and moved his knight backwards, and the idea of that is he wanted to avoid that idea of me capturing, so that he'd have to capture back and end up with some pawn structure damage around his own king. This is also preventing the invasion on c2, by the way. So I actually quite like this move from my opponent. I think it's a nice idea. But the knight has gone backwards, so always want to check whether that creates some new opportunities. One thing that I could do is look to put the queen behind the bishop at this point. Now, the knight currently defends the g2 square, but with the queen on b7, the knight on e1 is somewhat chained to its post. He might be provoked into playing f3, or if he moves the knight, well, for one thing, if he moves the knight, I can always consider taking, like here. I could just take. But if he moved the knight to d3, for instance, then I could certainly take on g2. I think that this might provoke him to play f3. That's my guess. Although it's also possible that he won't see the threat. But it creates some problems for my opponent to solve. But okay, he moves the knight instead out to f4. Not quite sure what he's up to here, which is a good signal to pause and try and find out what my opponent might be up to. You know, this is actually a good moment to take my own advice and look to simplify the game a bit. Because this knight is coming in towards the king side, potentially. So it'd be a good idea, I think, to try and swap that knight off if I could. So knight to d5, and I'm hoping for this trade. He could look to avoid the trade, but if he goes for the trade, then we get the scenario that I was just talking about, right? Where I get closer to an endgame with extra material. Other ideas can include looking to further increase my influence over the only open file of the board. So doubling the rooks is something that I could certainly consider. His dark squared bishop is actually stuck behind its own pawn now. So the d4 pawn gets in the way of white's bishop and its influence over the long diagonal. Remember a few moves ago where he went for this... Yeah, he went for this bishop to c1, bishop to b2 maneuver, and then very quickly he played d4, which had a couple of problems. One of them was that it lost this pawn, but the other is that now, if we return to the live position, the pawn is actually blocking the bishop's own scope. So we're going to see what my opponent might have in mind next. Okay, bringing the queen, that makes some sense. But at this point, it's correct, I think, to eliminate one of the attackers. So let's just do that. Don't want that queen to be getting too scary with the knight involved as well. It's actually quite well known that knights and queens work well in tandem with each other. So when you can see counterplay forming, well, one way to just nip that counterplay in the bud is by trading off, right? So now he can't really get a good attack going with just his queen. He's going to have to take back here. There's not really any other move. And yeah, with just the queen, my king is well enough defended, I think. So what can I do from here after he takes back? Well, doubling rooks, as I said before, is certainly one plan. This bishop is defended, so I don't need to worry about this at the moment. I could also look to improve the bishop with bishop to g5, although that would drop this pawn on d6. So always be thinking about the moves that you'd like to play, whether you can actually play them. Bringing the queen up is another idea. That would allow me to play bishop to g5 next. I actually quite like this. I don't think there's any tempo gaining moves that white can play in response. Just bringing the queen into the center of the board. The knight still can't move out without losing the pawn on g2. And my idea is, yeah, now this pawn is defended twice, so I can actually bring the bishop out to g5. We might see a move like this, actually. I wouldn't be surprised if he looks to bring his rook out to c1 to contest the open file, and then we could get bishop to g5, which would skewer the queen and the rook if it's on c1. Notice that my opponent doesn't have a light squared bishop, and I've put the queen and the bishop on light squares. Okay, so he has moved his queen over to g3. That's looking to just avoid any ideas with bishop to g5, which is something that I was threatening before. He doesn't actually have a threat here, but maybe he's looking to bring his knight out. Maybe that's what he's looking to do. Well, I'm just going to continue with doubling the rooks. That was the idea that I had before. So rook to c8 is coming next, and with doubled rooks, I'll be dominating the only open file of the board. So this knight is actually getting in the way of the coordination of his two rooks. He wants to bring it out, but it's a bit hard for him to do it. I mean, maybe now he actually can because the queen is guarding g2. Like, he could play knight to d3 now, and then he'd take back, and yeah, there wouldn't be a threat on g2 thanks to the fact that the queen is guarding that square. Okay, so now he plays f3. Can certainly understand that. He doesn't like this pressure on this diagonal. So, well, the bishop's forced to move, so where do I move it to? I think I can bring it just back here. And this way, it's guarding any possible pressure that the queen could have against g7. Like, I'm still thinking to myself, how could I lose this position? Like, how could things go wrong? Well, one way that things could go wrong is if the queen and the bishop were able to put pressure onto g7. It isn't possible right now because the pawn on d4 isn't able to move. But if the queen was to move away and d4 was able to be pushed to d5, well, then we could potentially see an issue there. But with the bishop on g6, then there can't be any pressure towards g7. It just doesn't work. Just one thing I've noticed here, the rook and the queen are on the same diagonal as each other, so if I could play bishop to h4 successfully, then I could look to create a skewer. I really want to get this dark squared bishop into the game somehow. I think this is the one piece which needs to start playing. Like, the rooks are now coordinated very well on the only open file. If I could play bishop to f6 or maybe bishop to g5, because bishop to g5 would also come with the threat of playing bishop to e3. Just looking to improve slowly here. Bishop to f6 also creates the threat of capturing here, capture back, and queen there. Looks pretty good. Let's go with that. Note that the pawn here is defended thanks to the queen. The rooks are just waiting for an entry point here. Like, I want to be able to play the rooks into c2 or c1, but I just can't quite do it at the moment. Not until these two pieces have been traded off. Like, the knight guards the c2 entry point, and the bishop guards the c1 entry point. So with trades, I'm hoping to change that. Like, if I can trade off this bishop, then I'll have the c1 entry point. I think my opponent has played reasonably well, given his rating. I mean, 400, there could certainly be bigger mistakes in the game than what we've seen. It's really been, at the start, we saw capturing with the queen, which gave me a free developing tempo. And then these moments where he offered me free pawns, which I was able to take. That was one. and then that was another. But if we return to the live position, he's still only 2 pawns down, and he's also managed to keep the clock reasonably even, which is good going. But yeah, I mean, the way that he can improve even further is to not offer those opportunities to win material that he was giving me, that we've already mentioned. Okay, so now the rook has come over to d1. That does offer me the chance to win this pawn here, but that would give up this pawn there. So yeah, the idea is that he wants to keep that that pawn defended. Maybe I can play the bishop in here now. Let's see. If he captures, I capture back. He captures, and then I capture back. There's nothing on the back rank, is there? No, I don't think so. No, I think I'm fine. So that's just attacking the rook, inviting this capture, which will actually simplify the position further. And if we do get these trades, then I'll end up with a rook on the second rank, which will be very strong. It'll be attacking the bishop, and also once the bishop moves, it'll be attacking the pawn on a2. So continuing to play actively. Don't want to give my opponent time to breathe. Want to just keep on creating threats. It certainly invites this trade though. Like it's very hard to resist this trade. This knight is passive. This bishop is creating a threat. It's probably not good for white to trade, but it's certainly the move that he's thinking about here, because otherwise you've just got to move the rook away somewhere. Like you could move the rook. Well, where do you move the rook? You could move the rook all the way back to where it was. If you move it to d2, I guess that's possible. Instead, though, he moves it to c1. Okay. And the idea now, maybe I can again look to trade. Let's go with this, inviting a trade again. I'm really just trying to get my rooks into the position. This is the one thing that I'm lacking here. Now the reason I moved the bishop back here is because I want to prevent that rook from going back to d1, because the other threat I've got, remember, is capturing on d4. The rook on d1, when it was there, was preventing that plan. So now I'm inviting these rooks to be traded, and then I'll still have this pressure on d4. And if I get the pressure on d4, then it wins another pawn. Trade off the bishop. The queen gets here, which is a nice central square, and we get closer to a position which is more easily winning. There's still some complexity here, you know. Like there's still the queen on an aggressive post pointing towards my king. But now he goes with rook to b1, avoiding the trade. Okay, but now I think there's no reason not to play bishop to d4. Looking to trade and trade. Always got to be careful about pins. Like with the bishop on d4, then there's always the thing you need to calculate. Well, what if the bishop was pinned? Because the bishop on d4 will be in front of my own queen. But the thing is, he can't actually move that rook to create a pin, because his rook would be pinned as well. So this, I'm sure, is pretty fine. He'll take back, I guess. And then I'll get my queen to d4. This was my plan. And once the bishop is traded, I'll have the ability to bring the rook into c1. So you can see I'm not just thinking about material here. I'm also thinking about entry points, right? Like how I can get further into my opponent's position. So what I really want to do with this dominance over the c-file is to use it. And I can't use it unless I can get the rook into an aggressive square. And it's just the fact that this bishop is guarding c3 and c1, and then the knight is guarding c2. it all adds up to meaning that I can't get these rooks in. But once this bishop is traded off, which I think we're about to see, then I'll have the ability to play rook to c1. So this is how strong chess players think. We think not just in terms of winning material, but also objectives, plans. Yeah, improving the position. So my opponent's thinking here, it's obviously a difficult position. He probably doesn't want to trade, but he also will see that his rook is under attack. Now, as I mentioned before, there is still a threat in the position, so I don't want to switch off completely here, because let's say that he doesn't take, right? Let's just say that he plays a move and it's my turn again in this position. Well, the tempting move, of course, is to take the rook, and let's say he takes with the king. Well, then in that position, we've again got this threat, and actually, this is exactly what he's tried to do. It's quite sneaky, right? Look at this. If I take the rook, which is the tempting move, then he's got checkmate on g7. Remember a few moves ago when I said that there's still some threats in the position with his queen and his bishop pointing towards g7? And I said that it's not a threat now, but it could be. Well, this is exactly the kind of thing I meant. So, yeah, I mean, nice try, honestly. Honestly, nice try by my opponent. But what I can do here is instead take this bishop. That's the move that he may not have really thought about, because I think many players at his own level would just instantly see, the rook can be taken, great, and then find themselves checkmated. But the thing is, that rook didn't have to be taken. And instead, now I can eliminate more of the counterplay that my opponent formerly had. And once he takes back, maybe with this rook, I'm not sure. Not too sure which rook he'll take with, but the point is I'll be able to finally invade with rook to c1, either way. And then that knight will be pinned, and yeah, I'm making progress. So 3 pawns up. 3 pawns up. That's a winning endgame, and I'd be happy to enter an endgame if my opponent wanted to go for that. He's considering which way to take back, and he's also probably a bit disappointed that I didn't fall into his trap. But, you know, this is one reason that I'm 2100. I wasn't born yesterday. I've seen these traps before, and you always are thinking, right? Like, you're always thinking, if I do this, what will my opponent do in response? This is really the best way to improve at chess, is to be thinking always, why did my opponent do that last move? Like, a move such as that king to h1. Like, what could the idea be there? And you know, it didn't take me too long to understand that his idea is that he's hoping for me to take this rook. So get inside the mind of your opponent, and I think your level will definitely improve. So that's a move that comes with a threat. The threat, of course, is to take the knight. And he goes ahead and defends, which makes a lot of sense. Now, is there a way for me to add pressure here? Let's see. Well, I could continue to improve, just bringing pieces in. That rook is actually hanging, just note. So the idea perhaps of queen to c4. Also this rook is hanging, so I could attack that one too. That's actually quite tempting. What if I played this? Queen here, where does the rook go? It's a bit short on squares, isn't it, actually? Just note this pawn. It still needs to be guarded by the queen, but this is a bigger threat right now. He can't move the knight, because then he'll lose the rook. So I'm just looking to take advantage of the pieces of my opponent which are not defended. So that's a forcing move, because the rook is now attacked. And he brings his queen in to defend. Okay, he was also offering the queen trade, which I'm which I'm happy to see, honestly. Like, at this point, I'm not so worried about trading queens, because that allows me to get even closer to an endgame. Now this pawn is not going to be a problem anymore, and in fact I can even start thinking about advancing it. So how's he going to take back? Well, he has to take back with this rook, right? If he takes with this rook, then he loses the knight, and that's exactly what's happened. So that's a shame. Now this does make it very easy. Now I just need to trade the rooks, and I'll have an extra bishop along with the extra 3 pawns. So, you know, my opponent was also under some time pressure there, which might have contributed to that mistake. Now his king is going to go to h2. One thing I can look to do is try and cut off the king's escape. And I can do that by trying to bring the pawn up into h4. And then with the g3 escape square prevented, thanks to the pawn on h4, if he allows it, he might not, of course. He might play h4 himself. Okay, he's looking to break out, but this, I think, still allows me to play h4, just cutting that escape square off. And my idea is going to be to bring the other rook up into c1 and look to create a checkmating threat on h1 or g1. So let's just continue with this. Rook to g1 is the threat now. And can I actually execute this checkmate here? Yes, I think I can. So rook to g1, that forces king to h2. See, the g3 square is taken. That was my idea. So here's how the game's going to finish. Rook to g1 check, king to h2. Rook to h1 check, king to g2, and that's going to be checkmate. So I'm actually going to go ahead and play all of those moves as pre-moves, because I've seen that this is a forced checkmate, and that's going to end the game. So if you enjoyed this video, do go ahead and subscribe to the channel. And remember, if you're looking to improve your chess, then click the link in the description below. We can set up a time to chat and work on improving your results in the game. Now that you've seen what it takes to defeat a 400 rated opponent, click here to check out the next video in the series where I take on a 500 rated opponent. The entire series will see me take on opponents all the way up to a 2000 rating and show you how you can win at every level.